consider love and powder post Beetles. Yes, welcome. Thanks for joining us as we look into the life and message of Elizabeth Elliot. She called us to live to a higher standard and not substitute something that won't last. Instead of giving God our best, our series continues as we hear from family, friends, and others influenced by the life and message of Elizabeth Elliot. Powder Post Beetles. We'll be thinking about that in part 4 of our 5-part series. It's called With Love from a Mother's Heart. Our first program is called If Only. We'll be hearing from a writer and longtime friend of Elizabeth Elliot, Eileen Chambers, as she talks about her mother in the faith and about a first kiss. Later on, we'll hear from a listener who was helped during a time of grief. We'll be getting to that later. First, though, this is called If Only. Last week, we were reminding you of that old hymn, Loved with Everlasting Love, from George Wade Robinson, the music from James Mountain. It says in part, things that once were wild alarms cannot now disturb my rest. Closed in everlasting arms, pillowed on the loving breast, oh, to lie forever here, doubt and care and self resign, while he whispers in my ear, I am his, and he is mine, his forever, only his. Who the Lord and me shall part? Ah, with what a rest of bliss Christ can fill the loving heart.
You are loved with an everlasting love. That's what the Bible says. And underneath are the everlasting arms. This is your friend, Elizabeth Elliot, talking today in the studio with my dear friend, Glenda Revel of Smithfield, Virginia. Glenda has been telling us in the last couple of days some of her amazing story of the faithfulness of God, even in a home which was anything but Christian. A father who was an alcoholic, mother also alcoholic. Am I correct about your father?
My father
was not alcoholic,
right.
But they were not Christians.
No.
This was not a Christian home, and her mother was not only an alcoholic, but also became very promiscuous and really hated you, didn't she, Glenda?
Yes, she did.
I mean, it was your fault that you were born. And Glenda's response is what I want you to understand. We were talking yesterday about suffering, and Glenda said everyone suffers. The great question is what?
Our response to the suffering.
I would give a very simple definition of suffering. It's not original with me. I think it goes back several thousand years. It's not in the Bible. But suffering is having what you don't want or wanting what you don't have. You certainly experienced both kinds of suffering, didn't you? There were many things that you wanted. One of them was God.
Yes.
Someone to love you.
Yes.
And you had a lot of things you did not want.
That's correct. When I look back on those years, I think perception is everything, and perspective. And I'm so thankful that God gave me an eternal perspective. The Apostle Paul, who suffered all of those things that we talked about yesterday, said this light and momentary trouble is working for us a weight of glory, far more
exceeding and eternal.
That's right, weight of glory. And he also said in another passage, the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that shall be revealed in us. One of my favorite quotes is from Hugo Bassie's sermon in the hospital, and this is what he said, "Measure thy life by loss instead of gain, not by the wine drunk, but the wine poured forth. For love's strength standeth in love's sacrifice, and whoso suffers most has most to give." As I'm counseling younger women who come to me with their sufferings, I try to encourage them that by suffering, they will have so much more to give. And the people we know who minister to us are always people who've suffered deeply. And so when I look back on my life, I really don't feel that I've suffered deeply. But I can thank God for what I have endured, because I see that it has given me, first of all, something that I can offer to God. And you taught me that. You've taught me everything I know. That I can offer my suffering to God as a unique sacrifice. And that meant the world to me when you taught me that, because I always wanted something that I could give to God that no one else could give. And the only thing that I can give to God that's unique is my suffering. That's such an encouragement to me. And then we can become broken bread and poured out wine for other people when we have suffered. If, however, we look at our suffering as a grave injustice that has been wrought against us by wicked people, we become angry, and that root of bitterness that the Bible speaks of grows up in our hearts. And then we become the foolish woman who tears our house down with our own hands. And I see that over and over in the letters I receive, the problems that women are dealing with in their homes, many, many times spring from their own faulty attitudes.
Now, there's a Bible verse in Proverbs about a wise woman.
Yes, Proverbs chapter 14, verse 1. The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. And I think a foolish woman is a woman who has the world's attitude, has not had her thinking transformed by Christ, and who believes that she had rights and they were violated. And because of that, she can excuse her wrong attitudes, her anger, her rebellion, because after all, look how so-and-so treated me. The wise woman, I believe, receives and accepts from God what he has given.
Now, Glenda, you're going to be, I know that we've got a lot of listeners out there thinking, is this woman going to tell us that this terrible thing that has happened to me was given to me by God? What did he have to do with it?
I have a quote here by George MacDonald. It's part of a poem that he wrote, and it certainly says it much more eloquently than I could. Thou workest perfectly, and if it seem some things are not so well, 'tis but because they are too loving deep, too lofty wise for me, poor child, to understand their laws. My highest wisdom half is but a dream. My love runs helpless like a falling stream. Thy good embraces ill, and lo, its illness dies.
Please read it again. We can't absorb all that at once.
Thou, of course, speaking of God, thou workest perfectly. And if it seem some things are not so well, 'tis but because they are too loving deep, too lofty wise for me, poor child, to understand their laws. My highest wisdom half is but a dream. My love runs helpless like a falling stream. Thy good embraces ill, and lo, its illness dies. The Bible says that all things work together for good, fit together in a plan for good to those who love God.
Can't we find a few exceptions to that?
All things.
All means all.
Do I believe that God was in the things that happened to me as a child? I believe that I live in a sinful, fallen world with sinful, fallen people. And God takes those circumstances and redeems them if we allow him. A comprehended God is no God. I'm a mere mortal, and I cannot understand all of the dealings of God. But I know this. He's love.
Evelyn Underhill said, if God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped.
Yes. Another quote I have here is by Reverend John Macduff, who lived in the 18th century. I love this. He says, how it would keep the mind from its guilty proneness to brood and fret over second causes. And I see a lot of that in the mail I get. If only this hadn't happened to me. If only this person hadn't done this to me. Brooding and fretting over second causes. Were this grand but simple truth ever realized, that all that befalls us are integral parts in a stupendous plan of wisdom, that there is no crossing or thwarting the designs and dealings of God.
That's wonderful. I think Samuel Rutherford uses almost the same metaphor of the confused rollings and wheels of second causes. When we get angry at the person who has done us in, shall we say, it's very likely to move from anger against that person to anger at God.
Yes.
I get many letters, and I'm sure you do too, from people who are really angry with God because God has either not answered a prayer, or he's answered it the wrong way, or God has allowed something to happen. And the only thing I can think of to say to those dear people is, do you know any other place in the universe to which you can turn except to God? There is no other refuge.
That's right. And I can be thankful that in those tender early years of my life, God stripped away any other superficial refuge so that I had nowhere else to turn but to him.
And you sat under that willow tree, and that was your little refuge, geographically and physically. And that was where you talked to God, listened to God, recited those hymns that you'd learned in church.
Yes, I did. I think back about that very often because I'm sure had anyone seen me, they would have thought that poor, lonely little girl, she never has anyone to play with. My mother used to lock me out of the house all day. I couldn't go in. I would go to my neighbor's house to use the potty. And yet I look on those times and am so thankful that I had quietness and solitude. It permitted me to meditate on things that I'm sure I never would have thought of had I been with other children all the time, had I had a happy home life. God has given far more to me than would have been given had my circumstances been ideal.
He takes our sufferings, our loneliness, our deprivations, whatever it is that our listeners may be thinking of in their particular case today. He takes those and transforms them into something beautiful. I love that phrase that you read in the poem, too loving deep, too lofty wise. You couldn't possibly have understood why these things were happening to you as a little child. But now you can look back and see how loving deep and how lofty wise God was. We wouldn't have you here today, Glenda, to help these other people if you hadn't responded to God in faith.
I'm so thankful that he put that in my heart to respond that way. It certainly wasn't any indication of my goodness, but the goodness of God to give me that perception.
Part 3 of our 5-part look at With Love from a Mother's Heart. That was called If Only. Later on, we'll hear about those powder post Beetles. Right now, though, a writer and longtime friend of Elizabeth, Eileen Chambers, shared the fact that Elizabeth was like a mother in the faith.
I suspect there are countless folks out there just like me who see Elizabeth Elliot as a mother in the faith. She had this relentless knack of telling you what you needed to hear, but probably did not want to hear. Take feminism, for example, or premarital sex. Did you know that the first man she ever kissed was Jim Elliot on the day that he proposed to her? Or take whining. Elizabeth was a no veil of tears girl. How about doing your own thing versus obeying God? Or, as she is very well known for, and as I have previously mentioned, the fact that heartache and suffering are inherent in the Christian walk.
A mother in the faith. That was Eileen Chambers, a friend of Elizabeth and a writer. Well, our series is about With Love from a Mother's Heart. In one of her devotionals, Elizabeth talked about her spiritual mother. She wrote in part, "Dear Catherine," that refers to Catherine Morgan. "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine. Hers has been an elixir for me. She's one of those who bring forth fruit in old age, though she'd hit me for suggesting she's anywhere near that category. May God make me like her." Hey, do you have a spiritual mother? Hey, let's get to part 4 of With Love from a Mother's Heart.
You are loved with an everlasting love. That's what the Bible says. And underneath are the everlasting arms. This is your friend, Elizabeth Elliot, continuing my talks today with Glenda Revel of Smithfield, Virginia. Glenda is the author of a book which I hope many of you have read and many more of you will read, called Glenda's Story, and the subtitle is Led by Grace. She's a woman with a testimony of the marvelous grace of our loving Lord, grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt. And that's from one of the old hymns that we used to sing in family prayers when I was growing up. Welcome, Glenda.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. In the book I'm writing now, which is geared to women with backgrounds similar to mine who are longing to build a home for Christ, I started using an illustration from the house that our family lives in. We bought an old Victorian farmhouse about 7 years ago, and it was a shambles when we bought it. We've very lovingly and I hope patiently restored it. And during those first 2 years, we began seeing some powder on the pine floors, just little piles of white powder here and there. We had no idea what it was. And we were keeping ourselves very busy doing what we thought were important things, such as rewiring, replumbing, putting walls up, wallpapering, stenciling, painting. And so we kept ignoring the little piles of powder on the floor. About a year later, we had to refinance our mortgage, and at that time we had to get a termite report. Of course, we had gotten one the year before when we moved into the house, but we discovered at this point that the man who sold us the house had a false letter written that it had never had a termite inspection and that the house indeed was eaten up with termites and powder post beetles. Powder post beetles work silently inside the wood, just chewing away, churning out very fine sawdust, and that was the powder we were seeing. So as we were working so hard to make our home beautiful, it was being eaten out from underneath us by termites and powder post beetles. And I began to think how similar that was to what the foolish woman does as she's tearing down her house with her hands. Because when she has responded to whatever suffering has come into her life with anger and bitterness and resentment and self-pity, those things aren't easy to see on the outside. As a matter of fact, what she's doing on the outside may look very good, but you can believe that they are undermining what the Lord is wanting done in that home. And if she does not find the cure for that bitterness, eventually she will tear her house down, literally, with her own hands.
One thing that I think needs to be said again and again is that the real test of the validity of our faith and of our trust in God is in those hidden places at home, in our relationships with, for example, our husbands, our children, perhaps if you're single, your relationship with your mother or your boss at work, the things where we don't even stop to think about them having anything to do with anything spiritual. These are just nuisances that we have to put up with at home. But those are the real testing grounds, don't you think?
Yes, I certainly do.
And so many of these women who want to serve God have no idea that you start in the kitchen. You start in the bedroom. You start in the bathroom.
Yes. You
don't go to church and ask to teach a Sunday school class. That's not the first thing.
Yes. I read just recently, I was reading My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers, and he said, Christian work is often used to evade the soul's concentration on Jesus Christ. And I do see that, and I have to be on guard all the time myself, because it is the hidden places where no one else sees, where we get our greatest victories and where we have our greatest failures.
Give us that quote again, will you please?
Christian work is often used to evade the soul's concentration on Jesus Christ.
To evade the soul's concentration on
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
If we're very busy leading the church choir and teaching Sunday school and leading the youth group and doing all of these very nice, good things, we can easily use that to avoid the hard things. Submitting to our husbands, treating our children as if they were the Christ child, being happy to mop our floor when other women are out doing prestigious things.
Now, would you expound a little bit on what you mean by treating your children as you would the Christ child?
Well, I believe that, as you have taught me so well, all of the work we do, if we do it for God, is spiritual work. And although I've been given the privilege in the last few years of speaking before groups and talking to many people and even counseling at times, that is no more spiritual work than what I do privately in my home. As a matter of fact, I think it's much less spiritual work before God. And if I am busy at home, maybe I'm preparing to speak, and one of my children comes in and asks me a question, and I'm abrupt with that child because I'm busy, I have been abrupt with Christ in that child. And understanding that makes me many times have to go to my children and ask for forgiveness.
We have the verse in Matthew 25:40, inasmuch as you've done it to one of the least of these my brothers, you've done it to me.
Yes.
In other words, Jesus was teaching us that in every single human being, we ought to see Jesus Christ and treat that person as though he or she were Christ himself. And would you go so far as to say that applies also to an unborn baby?
I certainly would. Yes, indeed.
That unborn baby is Jesus Christ in that woman's womb, as he was in Mary's womb. Mary was willing to receive this gift from God, not knowing the pain and the suffering that she was going to endure because of being the mother of the Son of God. But there's a sense in which every single one of us who's given the privilege of being a mother carries Christ in us. Perhaps we have a little bit deeper understanding of what that means than any man could possibly have, because we have actually carried a child in our womb. But it's horrendous to think that so many are killed before they are born because they're a nuisance.
Yes.
And the parents don't want them.
And I know that I was a nuisance to my mother, and that my birth made her life much more difficult. But I'm so thankful that she allowed me to have life.
Well, I am too. You would not be with us today if God somehow in his mercy had made sure that you were not done away with as you might have been.
I think also understanding that Christ is in our husbands. And I think that's a little more difficult than seeing Christ in our children
Yes.
at times.
Yes, yes.
And I remember when I first got married, of course, it was difficult for me in many ways to relate to my husband as a wife. But I also remember just having rebellion in my heart about certain things. I'm so ashamed to tell you this. I'm telling the whole world. But I remember the first year of our marriage, one of the things I despised doing was folding his socks because they all looked like the same color to me. The blue ones and the black ones and the brown ones, they all looked the same. And I would constantly mismatch them. And David is never critical, but he would pull his socks out, and all he would have to say is, "These don't match," and I would be just wounded. And I remember sitting on the living room floor, crying, feeling sorry for myself because I had to fold the man's socks. He was out laboring to provide a life for me, and I didn't want to fold his socks. Well, of course, God has changed my heart. I'm so thankful because it needed transforming. And now I delight in folding that dear man's socks.
Has anyone said to you, well, don't you get tired of taking care of these little kids? I mean, wouldn't you just put them in a daycare or something and go out and do something fulfilling?
The most fulfilling thing I have ever done is to cooperate with God in raising those 4 children. What a privilege.
And what lovely children they are. I'm here to testify that the Revel children are, well, they're model children, and I know that you will say they're not, certainly not all the time at home, but we've been in your home several times, and we love them. Charlotte is how old?
She's 19.
Sarah?
17.
Jason?
14.
And Jason is how tall now?
He is just a hair below 6 feet tall.
And Daniel?
Daniel is 11.
Is 11.
Yes.
Well, we are so grateful to have had you with us today, Glenda, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Author of the book, Glenda's Story, with the subtitle of Led by Grace. And she's working on another book that she's going to tell us a little more about tomorrow.
Part 4 of With Love from a Mother's Heart. That was Powder Post Beetles. We have one more in this series, and then we'll take a look at great hymns. That's next time. But before we go, let's hear from Jessy. Jessy, at a difficult time in her life, was helped by Elizabeth Elliot in a time of searching.
I have been greatly encouraged by Elizabeth Elliot's books, podcasts, and sermons. My husband died in 2021. In the months that following, I was searching for something steady rooted in Scripture to help me with this grief. Then I came across Elizabeth Elliot, who spoke as a widow while searching on YouTube. Her sermons met me at a vulnerable time, when my sorrow felt heavy and I was not sure how to move forward. God spoke to me through her. I felt like God was quietly opening a path for me, reminding me that He is still my shepherd. Even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I am deeply thankful for this ministry. When I'm given a chance to encourage other widows, I share with them her sermons. Mostly, suffering is never for nothing. I love her and her voice. I wished I knew her long before. Thank you so much for these sermons, podcasts, and books. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessy, one of the listeners to our time together. Maybe you've thought about expressing what Elizabeth has done to help you and maybe getting you to think about some things or make some changes or just look at life in from a different standpoint. Well, if you'd like to share your thoughts, go to elizabethelliot.org and leave a comment there. Find the podcast section and then the button that says share a message. Go on with your phone and you can leave that message for us. Thanks. elizabethelliot.org. On behalf of the Elizabeth Elliot Foundation, in cooperation with the Bible Broadcasting Network, let me thank you for coming along with us today. And let me invite you to check out all the resources at elizabethelliot.org. But until next time, may God remind you each day you are loved with an everlasting love. And underneath are the everlasting arms.